Good morning and welcome to Venture Houston 2021. This is the What's Next for Houston panel. I'm Rakesh Agarwal, and I'm here to introduce the panel. Let me take a moment and tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a proud Houstonian. I'm also the founder of a Houston software company, Snapstream. Snapstream's mission is to help organizations harness the power of moments. So if you've ever wondered how The Daily Show and Colbert get their TV clips, it's using Snapstream, software made right here in Houston. And Venture Houston is using us to clip and share moments from Venture Houston live on their Twitter account. In fact, maybe they'll clip this moment and share it live. I'm also a prolific angel investor and a limited partner in a number of venture funds. As an investor, I've built sort of an index fund of Houston startups and Houston funds from Onnit, Greylog, LionGuard, to Jay's fund, Altitude Ventures, to Mercury Fund, to JR's fund, Integrated. So I have a view of both the entrepreneur and the investor, and I want to tell you that the Houston startup community is a really special place. This is the community that I actively choose to be a part of, and it activates me every day. It gets me really excited about doing new and awesome things. And what I love about this panel is the diversity from entrepreneurs to investors to academia to economic development. So if anybody can get into what's next for Houston, this group can. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay. For those of you who don't know Jay, he's one of the most interesting people that I know. Jay has worked in the White House. He started a sleep diagnostic and treatment company, though he can't help me get better sleep somehow. He grew that company to over 50 people, and now he runs a venture fund, Altitude Ventures. And what's one of the cool things about Altitude is that Jay has nearly 100 investors, a lot of them in Houston, and for most of them, this was their first check into venture capital. So Jay has done sort of the groundwork of expanding our investor base and introducing them to venture investing. So Jay, over to you.
Thanks, Rakesh. I really appreciate it. And hello to everybody from around the country. Thanks for joining us today. Rakesh talks about doing some of the groundwork. I mean, people like him, like Blair Guru, I mean, they really deserve a lot of the credit, JR, here. I think without you guys and a greater community and some leadership from City Hall as well, we wouldn't have this organization with Houston Exponential. JR, Rakesh, from having us built a startup from the ground up and look at groups like Mercury Fund and Integrated who built funds in the city. It's great to have this community that, 5-6 years ago, really wasn't here. And so I'm very excited to, have seen where we've come from and looking forward to the next 5 years. And we have a great panel. So what I'm going to do first is just ask everybody, Susan, Dr. Kleinberg, and JR to give a brief sort of opening comment of who you are. And then I'm going to start taking some questions. I have a few questions I'm going to ask that I've prepared. And then for those of you joining us today, please go into the chat box and type your questions. We can see them and we'll try to pick and choose to give ourselves a diverse, set of dialogue here. And as well, we're going to have about 2 or 3 polls that will come up just for a little fun. So we'll try to show those results in real time. So the first poll is probably going to pop up on your screen here in a second, but let's first go to Susan Davenport with the Greater Houston Partnership. Susan.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Again, I'm Susan Davenport. I'm the Chief Economic Development Officer for the Greater Houston Partnership. We're the region's lead business organization. And so I lead the Economic Development Division here at the partnership. And we focus on initiatives, again, regionally, domestically, and globally, all around securing and outreaching, marketing, securing new opportunities for Greater Houston around jobs and CapEx. So.
Thank you. We'll go next to JR because we have to end on Dr. Kleinberg. So JR or John Riali.
Okay, great to be with everybody here this morning to talk about our city. My name is John Riali. Most folks call me JR. My mission is to partner with founders to help them realize their vision. I'm blessed that I get to do that through a couple of different hats. One through Integrated Capital, which is an early stage venture firm that we launched in 2017. Proudly serve as an EIR and lead the venture fund for the Texas Medical Center, where we invest in amazing healthcare founders. And then also, I'm an advisor to Snapstream and Rakesh to help him, transform what we're doing in the media space into more organizations through the power of moments. So it's great to be here. Great to talk about our city.
Thanks, JR. And, I know you're coming to us from your office, it looks like in the TMC, something I know we're going to talk about in a little bit. But for those of you joining, Houston is home to the largest medical center campus in the world. And it's, when we think about, and we'll get into this conversation about the, what else Houston has to offer, the TMC is truly a shining star, and a lot of that's due to what JR has built. But we'll end on an intro with Dr. Stephen Kleinberg.
Great. Well, thank you, Jay. I'm honored and delighted to be here. You guys are shaping the city in the new way that it needs to grow if it's going to succeed in the 21st century. We've been doing a survey in Houston now this is the 40th year. We began in 1982. Houston was booming. 1 million people had moved into the city between 1970 and 1982. 80% of the jobs in Houston were tied into the price of oil, and the price of oil doubled and tripled between 1970 and 1982. Booming city. Sudden collapse of the oil boom, major recession, and then a recovery into the new world of the 21st century. The source of wealth used to be natural resources, and Houston and Texas were beautifully positioned for the big fortunes were made from cotton, timber, cattle, sugar, oil. The source of wealth in the 21st century is knowledge, human resources, and as we reinvent ourselves as not the oil and gas capital anymore, but the energy transition capital, as Jay, I was just saying about what 6 years ago, you guys didn't exist in terms of building the source of wealth for Houston has to do with attracting the best and the brightest people in America, working at the cutting edge of knowledge, able to put that knowledge into commercial ventures. The resource of the knowledge economy is housed between the ears of the best and the brightest people in America. And part of our challenge is to attract them to Houston and to recognize that this is the place you want to be to build the economy of the 21st century.
Thank you, Dr. Kleinberg. And that's a great segue into our first question, which I'm going to turn to JR. COVID has sort of really exacerbated a lot of, folks looking beyond sort of traditional startup world, really in the coastal towns with, it seems like an exodus to other parts of the country, right? We're looking specifically in Texas, Colorado, and Florida, sort of some of the new hotbeds for startup activity. As Dr. Kleinberg said, with this transition out, JR, we talk about a challenge of how to attract, human capital and, investment capital, et cetera. JR, you spend a lot of time talking about value drivers for the city, which I know is common in our sort of lingo, but what are your thoughts on defining value drivers for the city of Houston?
Yeah, Jay, so the way I think about that is, first, I want to plug Dr. Kleinberg's book, because I think it's a must read to understand our history into where we're going. And there we go. And what Dr. Kleinberg writes about, as far as thinking about what education means, particularly in preschool, pre-kindergarten type education, I think is one of the big challenges that we'll look to solve as a community, now and over the next bunch of years. And it becomes a big opportunity, mainly because I think that the basis of competition really comes down to culture, and how do people see themselves fitting into a culture and seeing opportunity and where that aligns well with them. I think about Houston, I think of opportunity. We're a welcoming city. We're an awesome city where when folks come and move here, like myself, 21 years ago this month, once you get here, you understand why this is such an amazing place to live, work, find friends, really find your place in the world and go reimagine a future. I think that's an opportunity for us as a community to do a better job of really aligning our brand and talking about all those great things about who we are at the core, who we are authentically as a community, that really allows folks to see themselves why this is a place to come to get to know. I also look at like programs, Jay, around CPRIT, right? So the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. Look at that program since it started about, just under 15 years ago. They've invested over I believe about $3 billion to date, and $250 million last year. That's provided grants to, I believe, about 30 institutions, multiple companies, but also to bring talent from California, from Massachusetts, from New York, Dr. Jim Allison, looking at like world-class talent towards solving problems around cancer, right? And that's going to create a healthier Texas, it's going to create a healthier Houston, and it's going to create opportunities to start more companies, more new companies. And so I look at those types of things as an opportunity where we've harnessed that as a state. How do we go further around that? That I believe is going to be a massive, weapon for us as a community. But how do we evolve our thinking on that too, within other areas, to attract that same type of talent and give them that unfair advantage to take advantage of the resources and infrastructure that we have here, but also build from that and create, the next generation, as Dr. Kleinberg said.
Yeah, and that's a great, transition. I mean, I want to ask Dr. Kleinberg, kind of building off what JR said, is we've seen, this new era of talent interested in coming here. I mean, we'll talk about sort of the demographic shifts that you've seen, really here in our community over the last few years. And if you can maybe crystal ball it a little bit and talk about what you think the next couple of years looks like.
No, you bet. Let me just pick up on something that JR was saying, that one of the things in our surveys is that people complain because we invite them to, about traffic, pollution, crime, the weather, the no mountains, the flying cockroaches. We say, well, how would you rate the Houston area as a place to live? It's a wonderful place to live. Just overwhelmingly, people come here. We still have a reputation that we need to overcome to some degree, but it's happening already. But once people get here, they discover this is really an extraordinary place. And so that's the great thing that Houston has going for it. And we need to build on that in the way that JR was saying. But Houston has undergone just remarkable transformation. Houston is where all of America is heading. And, we're in the midst of a demographic revolution, right? America was a land made up of European nationalities. 82% of us were from Europe. We were operating under restrictive laws that allowed only Northern Europeans to come to America. The law was changed in 1965. We thought nothing would change, and suddenly we became a nation of immigrants again. And 88% of all the new immigration into America in the last since 1965 and 1970, 88% has come from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. The United States, that have been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. The first nation in the history of the world that can say we are a free people and we come from everywhere. And nowhere is that clearer than Houston. And so it's a part of the great, the census gives a projection for what America will look like in 2050. And it's a picture of Houston today. We are where all of America is going to be as the 21st century unfolds. So it's part of why I'm making that claim that this is a prophetic city. How we manage this transition and build the multi-ethnic world successfully. How do we build a world where all of us are minorities? All of us coming together in one remarkable place to build something that has never existed before in human history, a truly successful, inclusive, equitable, united, multi-ethnic society made up of all the peoples, all the ethnicities, all the religions of the world gathered together in one remarkable place. Yeah. So that's a big part of the story of Houston. And part of what you guys are working on and developing is exploiting that remarkable talent that's coming now from all over the world and finding Houston is one of the most, is in fact the most ethnically diverse city in all of America, measured by the degree to which all of us are. So one of the best ways to measure ethnic diversity is how close does a population come to 1/4 Asian, 1/4 Latino, 1/4 African American, 1/4 Anglo. And by that measure, Houston beats out New York as the most ethnically diverse city in the country. The most ethnically diverse county on the planet is Fort Bend County. Fort Bend County today is 21% Asian, 20% African American, 24% Latino, 33% Anglo. You can't get much closer to 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. So that's a big part of the Houston story in the 21st century. And then the other piece, if I can just keep going one more second, is of course the growing inequalities predicated above all else on access to quality education, as JR says, from birth to college, from cradle to career. And we don't do a very good job on that in Houston because you didn't need education to make money in Texas, right? The big Texas fortunes were made from cotton, timber, cattle, sugar, oil. Now the source of wealth, as you say, is knowledge, is investing, starting with early childhood and building the resources to prepare the population of Houston for success in this very different world of the 21st century.
Thank you, Dr.
So
Kleinberg.
really wonderful. Interesting time to be around.
Yeah, always insightful. I mean, that's, you just branded and marketed Houston, and that's a good transition into Susan. Great work with the partnership, Susan. A lot of big wins recently in terms of attracting some real talent into this city, corporations. So I just sort of want to, talk a little bit about what the Greater Houston Partnership is doing in terms of branding or marketing the city across the world, and some of the recent sort of wins that I guess we can qualify as that we've had.
Yeah, well, this is very quickly becoming one of my favorite conversations. You're talking about these great attributes of Houston, again, hitting on that talent, the image, and what we are undertaking here, and the diversity. And those are the things that we really focus on. But let me give you a little bit more. What are we proactively doing? And at the partnership, we're incredibly proactive with how we focus around economic development. So we know at the partnership, we see the data all of the time and have great access to Dr. Kleinberg and experts like JR and people who are really undertaking work around this region. We've got an incredible story to tell, but as we looked and focused over the past probably 18 months on really how were we going to tell that story as our region was expanding all of its activity around innovation and all the great points that have been made. So we did what I think was exactly what we should do. We talked to companies, we talked to talent, we talked to site selectors who seek new industries here and new companies. And we not only talked to domestic companies and site selectors, we talk to people globally because we are this global city and this incredibly diverse city. And so here's a couple of the things they said, and I hope they resonate with people because we know it, and now we're trying to transfer that message. But it is a modern, cosmopolitan, and global, and they use the word truly global city. Truly global. And so it's a distinction that they're seeing those things. What does that really mean to them? And they're saying, well, we're looking at the breadth of their industries. We're looking at their people and that diversity and where everyone's from. And they're saying that's really what sets Houston apart for us as we see that. And they feel that, we're focused on solving some of the world's greatest problems through the attributes of this talent that lives here in the breadth of companies. And so they see all of that and they say that really ties into why we think you're so global, right? And we see it. And I think really it's interesting. A lot of people are shocked when they learn how global this is. Back to Dr. Kleinberg's great point, the diversity and the breadth of our community and talent base, they really haven't focused in on that as much as I think they will be. But really, when you look at Houston's attributes and you say, where does this show up? It shows up in everything. Our arts and culture, it shows up in our food and food choices, all of the languages that are spoken in Greater Houston, all of that's part of it, even into the new green space and the amazing amount of resources that have been put into pulling that forward. So everything that we're doing, we take a targeted, proactive approach. We developed our message. We looked at Truly Global. We spend a lot of time telling that story to corporate CEOs. We do a lot of focused digital marketing campaigns. We had 250 pieces of content last year that were blasted out to corporate executives all over the world. We welcome the stories of these startups, the younger companies, the wins. We take those stories and they become Houston's story. We at the partnership are representing this community. And so we have, we do that through mission trips, international and domestic. In the last quarter, we were in virtually Silicon Valley, Japan, and the Netherlands, talking about all the activity that was ongoing here. And we did have a very good year with new wins. The message is beginning, I think, to resonate in new ways. And so you saw HPE put their global headquarters here and announce that at the end of the year. And we really saw 21 kind of projects in our target sectors begin to take hold. And that's the innovation side of our energy sector. That's the innovation side of life sciences. It's all of the incredible assets here looking at their next generation and how they can make that happen in Greater Houston.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Susan. We put up a few polls up, and one that Susan I thought was interesting. So, first question was, we wrote, as entrepreneurs look beyond traditional coastal towns to launch businesses and raise capital, is Houston in a position to compete? 70% said yes, with 14% saying I don't know, and 14% saying no. But I think as an interesting third polling question, we asked about economic incentives as you go out and recruit corporate America to come here. Track
Yeah.
that, and a lot of people said they don't know. They don't know sort of what Houston and what Texas has to offer. But obviously, let's talk about Houston. So I was wondering if you could sort of talk a little bit more in depth about some of the work the partnership does to really incentivize companies to come here. And then that will segue into sort of this culture question, which we'll talk to Dr. Kleinberg and JR about.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think one of the things that you have to think through is the value proposition of the state and how it exists, and its tax structure and cost of living and all of those things. Sometimes when companies are beginning to compare between 2 or 3 places, it may not be apples to apples based on some of those inputs that are ingrained into what we do. Now, additional incentive programs on top of that, I can tell you my team are experts. We've cataloged every single program you can find in the region as well as the state. And we have people able to take any situation that someone wants to look at, and we'll map it out for them. I can tell you that the city works very closely with us, the county works closely with us, and the state. And we are constantly in contact with all of those. So everything from workforce, one of the things we always like to say, the old adage, talent is the currency of economic development, back to all the good points that are being focused on. And so do you have a talent base that's going to make the region successful? Is the cost of living competitive, and can you do it cost efficiently? And then in Houston, you look at other attributes, the B2B opportunities, the customer base that sits here. We look at all of that, and then we look at programs, tax grants, we look at workforce skilling, we look at, depending on the size of the entity, there are just different programs across the board. So I would say we keep them cataloged all the time. Give us a call and we're happy to give you a detailed answer for your situation, if that's helpful.
No, that's great feedback, and hopefully sort of answers, I think, some of the questions. Dr. Kleinberg, as we talk about that shift, I mean, you've talked about sort of some of the history of what you've seen. I'm curious if we can sort of maybe try to crystal ball this a little bit, and I don't know what your thoughts are on the impact of COVID and remote working and how that's going to change, the city, both, from demographics, from the quality perspective. Please grace us with some of your knowledge.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how the pandemic experience, the year-long experience and of course in Houston, the decline of oil prices, the accentuating of the inequalities in the city, and how that's all going to play out as we recover eventually, right? Probably it's still going to be a little while before we're back to what we might think of as normal, and we're not going to go back to exactly the way we were. One of the big things, of course, that we all know is that it's going to be much easier to get together by Zoom and to meet in the office maybe once a week or something, and to be able to then live in a greater variety of areas. The broader question, I mean, I end the book saying the jury is out for Houston, and the jury is out for America, because it has so much to do with the deepening inequalities in the city and in the country that are just unsustainable. And so it's going to be interesting to see, can we marshal the resources to do what we know we need to do, to really invest in education for the kids who are going to be here, who are disproportionately African American and Latino. Anglos is a group that is aging the fastest, that 76 million Anglo babies born in that period after World War II, when the average American woman gave birth to 3.6 children, the leading edge of those 76 million turned 75 this year. We're going to watch a literal doubling of the population of Americans and Houstonians over the age of 65 will double by 2030. And the young people are disproportionately African American, Latino. The two groups overwhelmingly most likely to be living in poverty, the least well served by the structures of education in Houston. That's the real question. And ultimately, you're talking about a talent pool. We can't just keep attracting people from outside. We have to build it from inside as well. And one of the great challenges, I think, as we watch the Rice Ion innovation corridor right in the midst of Third Ward, are we going to be able to do that in a way that isn't just pushing people out and pushing up the price of things, but ensuring that the folks who live in the Third Ward can also benefit from and grow with and acquire the jobs that are going to be provided by this energy corridor that is so critical, this innovation corridor for the Houston future. So the future is up to us. It's not going to happen automatically. And that's been fascinating to watch. And Houston has so much going for it. Can we muster the political will to make the investments that will position the city for true sustainable success in the knowledge economy?
So on that point, I'm going to go to JR now, who's been involved really since inception, from this idea of building startup density. I mean, I get that term. I stole it from him when we talked about this several years ago. It was you're sort of 4 or 5 years now from when the mayor sort of formed a task force and started bringing together, a lot of the key players in the city. And as a result of that, we have really the reason why we're here today, Houston Exponential, both the nonprofit side and then what Guillermo and Sandy have built, which has been really incredible with the HX Venture Fund and attracting, funds from all over the country really to look at Houston and spend time here and then getting corporate VCs. So I sort of wanted if you could A, give us an update on the task force and sort of where we are with that, and B, talk a little bit more about the impact of the HX Venture Fund for this ecosystem and incredible shout out to everybody with HX, Houston Exponential, who's been really, building this, really the core of what we're all now seeing come to fruition.
Well, I think about 4 or 5 years ago when we were leading the task force, it would have been good to look into Stephen's crystal ball and get some more wisdom in what we were putting forward as far as, recommendations and our thoughts, based on what we learned about our city and learned about other places. On the HX Venture Fund, I'm so proud that was one of the initiatives. We put a lot of thought and real effort in getting like great leaders in Guillermo and Sandy to lead that and really take a concept that we saw as a great best practice and put it into play to learn from what happened and the impacts in Michigan and Cincinnati, but also make it then a very much a Houston-based initiative and make it fit who we are. And just look at why we have this conference here today with people joining us, probably from all around the country. Mainly because of, the efforts of leaders like Guillermo and Sandy in putting this together, and think about the density of investors now who've participated in this conference, who are participating in our community. That is such an important part, because as we talk about, Steve Case talked about this yesterday, right? It's about new companies. New companies are the fuel to like what drives an economy. And a big piece of that, you have to have the talent, right? So like, think about like why Jeff Bezos went to Seattle, right? It was close to one of the book wholesalers that was in Oregon, and because of the tax treatment in Seattle, right? And that became a great place for him to start. So it starts with that pull of talent. And then how do you surround that talent with other resources, including capital, right? So that'll be a big part of, maybe a lesson in what we thought about a few years ago through our recommendations. How do we start solving more of the early stage capital so we could partner with founders and help them build out their visions here in Houston? So I think that's going to be a big part of what's next and where we continue to focus. But I think the impact is really helping permeate a larger culture around this idea around talent, and not like startup as some like thing on the side, as like some group of, folks who like to wear t-shirts and jeans, but this idea of creators, of people who are imagining a new future, and how do we inspire them to have more of them, to have them realize that Houston can be a place for them to be successful. That to me is like the key. It's like, it starts there and then everything we put around them. And that's why, organizations like TMC and what we're doing through innovation, through organizations like the Canon, through all the different programs who've come here, through the Houston Downtown Initiative, through the Launchpad, how do we help surround founders, where they have a path to be successful, and we keep thinking about those resources? That's the key. They'll emerge and create the companies like Lion Guard, who now employs, almost 80 people since founding a few years ago. And those are going to be the large employers here in our community, and they're going to help transform, what Houston is and why it becomes this exciting place if you're a creator to want to be.
It's a good question. Now I sort of want to turn it over to the entire group. I'll kind of build off one of the questions we got from Natalie. She talked about how important is smart city technology to Houston's development as an innovative city. And I think that really, we look at some of the great things happening. I have a good friend, Ryan Martin, who's building Evolve, which is helping build this EV infrastructure around the city, really diving into that sort of smart city mentality. And Dr. Kleinberg, you talked early on about moving from the oil and gas capital of the world to the energy transition or energy mobility. I mean, most of my friends work in oil and gas. A lot of them are pivoting, and which is venture speak for looking at other areas to generate not just a living but investment capital, et cetera. And so, how do you see Houston really making that transition into this smart city, this hub of innovation, and seeing this transition from the oil and gas capital of the world to what we all know is the wave of the future, embracing climate change and embracing
and Houston becoming the third coast for the life sciences, and all the, and it's just from outside, it's just incredible how much you guys have accomplished in 6 to 7 years. I mean, there's now an infrastructure here. There's now a reason to be here. And then of course feeds on itself, and you get the talent, and you get the interactions that are so necessary. And Houston is positioning itself as a tech center, along rivaling Austin, we think, in some ways, and a much more livable place than Austin is. And a lot of the tribute goes to the work that we're watching here, and Houston. The great strength of Houston is the belief in we believe in ourselves. God did not intend the 4th largest city in America to be built on this crummy little swamp, this mosquito infested flatland, hot and humid, and we built this great city. And we're in the same process now of recognize, okay, what does it take? How do we position the city? And Houstonians believe in Houston, and we were saying how often people come reluctantly, but then rarely do they feel like, yuck, I've come to the wrong. This is a really exciting place to be these days, and a lot of the reason for that is the work that you guys have been doing. So.
Susan or JR, any comments on we talked about the energy transition piece for the city?
Yeah. Well, I'll just jump in and say from GHP's perspective, we had some pivotal wins this year. One of those was Greentown Labs, and you saw kind of some of those announcements earlier this year. And again, having even deeper focus, we've got about 50 startup development orgs that we've cataloged now, and those have come into Houston probably over the last, and JR would know this, probably over the last 4 or 5 years, really, some that were grown here and some that we've recruited in. But having those opportunities for all of them to provide assistance to the startup ecosystem that has been growing here under the direction of JR and many others, and I think is pivotal. From the partnerships perspective, when we look at the region, we kind of have this thing called Houston Next, and we've got these 3 pretty bubbles, and they kind of intersect all together, and we work in that middle piece, but it's strong economy, great quality of life, and opportunity for all. And then we have drawn a lens around it. And it's, again, back to a point that Dr. Kleinberg's making on diversity, equity, inclusion, racial equity. We want to see everything that we do here through that lens. We want to integrate it into everything that we're doing. So again, the great diversity among, all is this beacon for people to be here. And it, again, grows the system. I want to say one last thing. I think that it's so important as we work, because we see what companies are looking for, because we're actively doing recruitment in addition to everything else that we're growing and trying to retain and enhance, and so that we create these jobs and capital investment. But it is now very common, and I would say probably in the last 4 months, the profiles that come to us from large corporations and even mid-size and small, those diversity and equity and inclusion principles of your city are becoming a key question as part of what we call the questionnaires or the RFIs that we respond to. So I think, again, Houston's picture and the evolving data and all that Dr. Kleinberg's describing, that's really becoming the piece of this that we focus on greatly, and Houston plays well there.
Yeah.
And I think it makes us optimistic across all spectrum of business, small, medium, large, startup, you name it. I think we've got something to offer.
Thank you. JR, I want to ask you a question. We talk about the diversity of the city and the economy here. In light of sort of, the social justice reform last year, there was sort of a rude awakening in venture capital in the startup world about the lack of diversity. And in my opinion, Houston, there's no place better positioned to sort of be, have open arms for diverse founders. Houston's starting to see that. We have the Artemis Fund, right, a fintech focused investment fund here, local entrepreneurs. You have what Mercury, has been really diversifying. You have Heath Butler and his group really doing a lot of great things. How can we continue that trend? I mean, how can, as the startup ecosystem sort of expands, how do you see this continuing to tap into Houston's diversity and that really playing into each other?
I'll share something, a learning I've had over the last bunch of months, through TMC. So after George Floyd last year, one of the things we started asking questions about is, we started looking internally and asking what are we doing? And I'll give a big credit to Tom Luby, who really just started opening up everyone's way of looking at the world. We started inviting different folks to come join us, Black and brown founders, venture capitalists, so we could understand more issues that we were not aware of. We have a diverse team at TMC, but there's still questions that we needed to answer. And it opened us up to some new networks. So I'll give you an example. Jay, in Nashville, there's a guy named Marcus Whitney who's working on some great things. He's one of the founders of Jumpstart Foundry. He's working on something really interesting. I can't say what it is, but there's these great networks that you realize there's an intentionality of what goes into how you expand those networks. One of the things we put forward in the mayor's task force years ago was how do we drive more integration into the mayor's complete communities initiative? And you realize there has to be intentionality. There has to be, then resources that go behind, how do you take an idea or a bunch of words and make sure they turn into action? And so I think one of the big learnings, on that front, look at there's work right now that's going on around an initiative called the HX Impact Fund. I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to talk about it, but I think that it's going to become another great weapon here in Houston, again, around this idea of an understanding of a problem and taking action and being intentional about doing something. That's one of the great things, that Stephen wrote about in his book too, right? We're a city of conveners. Yes. And we give people opportunities to come together, and we've got to play to those superpowers in my mind, because it allows us to listen. It allows us to understand other perspectives, but we're a city of doers, and then we'll go take action and go do things. And I think that's been one of the exciting things for the community over the last few years, and really what the future holds in store, right? I've learned a ton more around the life science and healthcare community over the last few years, just being part of the team over the medical center. And wow, I see there being billion-dollar venture funds here in Houston on the life science front over the next, decade. And that, I believe, is going to be one of the largest accelerants of our economy and who we are as a community. I have deep conviction in that, because you could see it, but you could see the intentionality of the infrastructure that's being built that's going to attract diverse founders and all talent that really sees a new vision for oncology or treating cancer or the future of healthcare. And so I think that's become a big part. And the more we're able to talk about these different initiatives and what we're doing and get more awareness, I think it'll activate more folks to understand why there's opportunities to be here and be part of that.
Yeah, I think you've sort of answered one of my last questions, is why talent should move here, and I juxtapose that with the talent that's already here, right? I mean, we all have a good friend, Veronica Juarez, went off from Houston, worked at Lyft, was very successful. Is doing a lot, with Latina founders now. We need people like her to come back. Similarly, let's talk about who's here, Dr. Kleinberg, and sort of the trade-off between trying to recruit talent versus the talent that we have in the city. And that'll be the last question, and then we'll turn it to some closing comments to each of you.
Well, as I say, I think it's really very exciting. I mean, Houston is reinventing itself for the 21st century in ways that are in keeping with how it built its great economy in the past, but now calling for new ventures and new understandings, and above all, the shift from a basis of natural resources to human resources and knowledge, and a realization that we need to invest in what's here as well as attract others to come. But the ultimate real challenge is the inequalities. We talk about inclusion. Are we really able to do that? Are we doing it? Are we ensuring that this next generation of Houstonians that are overwhelmingly, as we said, African American, Latino, although there's also, of course, tremendous, the diversity is the greatest asset Houston could have, as it positions itself in the global economy, the gateway to the global marketplace. But ultimately, it's education, internal education, our education, what we're offering to kids as starting from birth to college, as we were saying. So there, and we need to do better there. And it's clear that the future of Houston will have a lot to do with this generation's willingness to make those investments to ensure. So I think one of the key examples to watch is, what are we going to do to Third Ward when the ION innovation corridor gets built all the way from the Texas Medical Center into downtown? Will we be just another gentrifier pushing people out and get out of the way? You don't have the time. Or are we going to make the kinds of investments that give people a stake in what we're doing across the board? And inclusion and equity, along with diversity, is going to be the hallmark of what Houston will be in the 21st century. But what we're doing here and what you guys have been doing is just enormously important and valuable. And I think it's incredibly impressive how quickly the change is occurring, how rapidly we're redefining Houston as the innovation capital and the venture capital of not just oil and gas anymore, but the new technologies of the 21st century.
Thank you, Susan. You want to give some closing comments before we wrap this up, and then we'll go to JR.
Yeah, no, I will quickly just say Dr. Kleinberg's made some great points and why people would want to be here. I think really again, back to what we're messaging, again, all over the world. And I do feel the message is beginning to take hold, but it's really about these amazing success stories that have made up our corporate community, as we're seeing now startups come into their own in many ways. And those stories, as we're beginning to see successes that you and JR have pointed out, and getting those stories out there, understanding that this is part of our culture. And it's really a story that's embedded in Houston's history again and its future. We've always been innovators in different ways, but I think the initiatives that the city and all of the groups that have been involved to date have put together around the innovation corridor and getting all of this amazing innovation out into the spotlight in many ways and connected a little bit differently. And I think that's helped to speed up the success because it was there. It was just kind of putting it all together in many different pieces and then opening up the invitation really to the world. But I will say too, to Dr. Kleinberg's great point about the issues that we still need to work on, we will always do that. The partnership convenes groups on these matters all day long. We consider that part of the work that we do. We've got 1,000 member companies. They are laser focused on those issues, and we're looking for opportunities to bring, again, innovation to solve these problems as well as these giant problems around the world. So.
Thank you. JR, any quick parting words?
Yeah, first, really grateful to be part of this conversation. This is awesome. So thank you. Two thoughts. I think on the inequalities, one of the opportunities is for Houston to put a flag down and say, here's what access to education is going to mean, and here's a charge that we could come together and go solve, where we could be known as the place where it is the greatest place in the world to educate your child. And that's a reason, where you could take pride in as part of a community. I think that would be an awesome challenge. Comes from something I read about, Kleiner Perkins, very famous venture capital fund out in Silicon Valley. About 50 years ago, we got, started with an $8 million fund. A family office funded, I think, $4 million of it. There is such an opportunity here as we think about new companies, new capital, and the idea of funding and working collaboratively with different family offices here, as far as being a large accelerant on seed funding and working with groups, like yours, Jay, and all the great work that you do. So I think that that's going to become another big piece as a community. How do we help fuel more new business and capitalizing those new businesses where we could drive those partnerships?
Thank you, JR. And, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Dr. Kleinberg. Thank you, Rakesh, and this whole group for joining us today. I think that the HX team has contact information for all of us if you're interested in connecting with us, talking about the respective topics. Obviously, big shout out to Guillermo and Sandy and the entire HX team. What a great 2-day conference you've put together, and really just the important work you all have been doing of attracting talent and capital into the city and getting corporations in the city to invest in startups as well. So thank you all. And to everybody, we hope to see you in person here. We'll do this again next year in different circumstances, but thank you all. And let's keep moving Houston forward. Appreciate the time today, everybody.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks for all the great work you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Keep it up.